Krystina Castleburning has been serving her community as a caregiver and intuitive healer for over 30 years. With an educational background in music, transcendental dance, psychology, behavioral neuroscience, herbalism, spiritual philosophy, holistic healthcare, and psychedelic integration coaching, she started her own practice in Seattle and is dedicated to helping those who suffer from chronic health issues and psychospiritual concerns. Being a polytrauma survivor herself, Krystina provides a compassionate peer support and trauma-informed care to her community. Krystina is a tireless advocate for holistic health care and believes those modalities should be accessible and affordable for everyone. Hell yeah. Krystina is an original member of the Transformational Women's Circus, which is a multidisciplinary program aiming to heal trauma and integrate the self. She is currently working on her degree to become a somatic and psychedelic therapist. Please, a warm welcome to Krystina Castleburning.
Well, hello. Apparently I don't really need to introduce myself. Thanks very much, Tom. So I'm an herbalist from Seattle, and I was just taking some courses on plant medicine preparation and integration, also navigating psychedelics for therapists and clinicians. And then I've been studying with Emma Bragdon at IMHU to be a spiritual emergence coach. All of this material is very fresh. I literally just ended my classes, so I'm going to be using a lot of notes here and skipping my introduction because y'all heard it. So let's see here. As a lifelong student in the healing and creative arts, I have become very excited, and spiritual emergence, plant medicine, and learning how to integrate that has given me a big sense of purpose and meaning. And I strongly feel that earth medicine can enrich us all. A lot of the information I will be sharing today, let's see here. Oh, here we go. For me, I find the best way to learn is to teach. So it will be fun for me to pass down some of the things that we've been discussing in my coursework. I have had some wonderfully informative teachers, and I hope you will take away something new from this talk. So let's dig into the topic. Continuing the healing journey after a psychedelically induced spiritual emergence, or EmergenceY. So what is a spiritual emergence? What is a spiritual emergency? I've had my own experiences with these processes, but these terms are rather new. I had to dig to find others who had experienced similar states of consciousness. It took years of floundering and seeking others until I found mentors and started taking courses. Before I started my coursework, I had never heard these terms before. So please raise your hand if you are like me and didn't really know what having a spiritual emergence or emergency means. Yeah. So it's a really important topic, and I was surprised that it hadn't been discussed in the psychedelic community that I'm in Seattle. So now, any of you know what it means? Raise your hand if you know what it means. Would you like to take, or anyone, would you like to take a stab at explaining what it is?
Sure. Anytime you have an altered state experience, it can leave you totally unsettled in a number of different ways. If you get stuck in that state, you can end up in a dysfunctional behavioral pattern. If through appropriate therapeutic or coaching input, you can then be shifted out of that dysfunction into a higher level of function and integration of those experiences. Stan and Krystina Groff put that together and wrote about that as a result of uncontrolled Kundalini experiences that actually led into alcoholism, but then ended up... So basically, don't take somebody to the emergency room and have them stuck there in their crisis. They won't necessarily come out of it better, but if you can coach them through the processes, then they can come out with a higher level of integration, much like they were talking about in the microdosing.
Yeah.
It's usually as a result of a macrodose.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that concludes my talk. He's done it for me. Good job. Yeah, I'm impressed. I did not know any of that before, so thank you. And now I do know these things. So, yes, Czech psychiatrist Stanislav Grof and his wife Krystina coined the terms spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency in the late 1970s. They founded a network called Spiritual Emergency Network at the Esalen Institute back in 1980 to assist individuals going through psychological difficulties associated with spiritual practice and spontaneous spiritual experiences. The Spiritual Emergency Network was created to provide a resource connecting therapists who have been experiencing and navigating transpersonal states. So basically, the network was serving to connect people like me who have gone through these processes with people who had also. So peer support, but also trained. And that still exists today. So that's a good place to go online, is to check the Spiritual Emergence Network out. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but for those that don't know, transpersonal psychology is a subfield of psychology that integrates the spiritual and transcendent aspects of the human experience with the framework of modern psychology. The transpersonal is defined as experiences in which the sense of identity or self extends beyond trans, the individual or personal, to encompass wider aspects of humankind, life, psyche, or the cosmos. During spring of last year, when I started training with Dr. Emma Bragdon, one of the original therapists at the Spiritual Emergency Network, she described the process as one of personal awakening into a level of perceiving and functioning, which is beyond normal ego functioning. At its peak, spiritual emergence is the experience of the ultimate unity of all things, a mystical experience emerging with the divine, which transcends verbal description. Among the positive effects of this process are increased creativity, feelings of peace, and expanded sense of compassion. So, any of you have any of those experiences before? Pretty rad. I really like the way that Emma Bragdon broke that down. Really beautiful. So I am curious if any of you briefly would like to share a little bit about an ineffable state that you've experienced. I mean, it's really hard to share an ineffable state, but if you went through an emergency and if you did not feel supported. Any of you brave enough out there? Yeah. Oh, okay.
This was back in my early 20s when I was somehow even stupider than I am today. And I didn't know at the time that high dose of vasorescence does cause paralysis.
Whoa.
And all of a sudden, you're literally, your soul leaves your body and you go, and you smash your face on the concrete.
Oh, thank you for telling me that, because I'm sure that someday that might be me if I didn't hear you telling me that, so thanks.
Only hero dose. Like, it's great for hero dose, blinders on, laid back, but psychedelic dose is, stick to the Cubensis.
So you're saying a lower dose of azorescence made you paralyzed, and you went... Okay, so hero dose, so you mean higher than a hero dose.
Oh, when that happened, no.
Okay, I think you said it backwards.
As arrestants, they're best done in a hero dose. When this happened, I didn't. I had just taken like a gram and a half or 2 grams, so it's just like a psychedelic dose, and that's where, it still hit me, the paralysis.
Okay, wow. Thank you for that so much. Amazing. So that's why this conference is so important, is because we're all learning and sharing together, right? Yeah.
What you're saying is go big and be crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
Go big or go home. Set and setting, definitely. And hopefully the term spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency will become lingo that y'all will take away from this as well. It's very important to know what it is. And also plant medicine and psychedelic integration and preparation. So we need to add that to our vocab and spread the word. So anyway, back to my speech. So what is spiritual emergency? I'm going to keep explaining this in different ways so that you just really think about it. So the process exists on a continuum with spiritual emergence. The Groffs defined spiritual emergency as critical and experientially difficult stages of a profound psychological transformation that involves one's entire being. They take the form of non-ordinary states of consciousness and involve intense emotions, visions, and other sensory changes, and unusual thoughts, as well as various physical manifestations. These episodes often revolve around spiritual themes. They include sequences of psychological death and rebirth, feelings of oneness with the universe, and encounters with various mythological beings and other similar motifs. Anybody ever seen an extraterrestrial or cool? I haven't. I'm kind of jealous. Sweet. A lot of you. Wow. Okay. So the takeaway from this is that both spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency are normal human experiences. Normal. Completely. Not a pathology or illness, as we so often paint it in the West. They are evolutionary processes of consciousness, rites of passage, of spiritual maturation, and should not be suppressed. Just as, what's your name?
James.
Just as James said earlier, should not be suppressed. When properly supported, these spiritual openings are conducive to healing and positive transformation of self. Many individuals experiencing episodes of altered states accompanied by various emotional, perceptual, and psychosomatic manifestations, that was a tongue twister, such as hearing voices or seeing entities, are not suffering from mental disease. And there is increasing evidence of that. Observation from many disciplines, including clinical and experimental psychiatry, modern consciousness research, experiential psychotherapies, anthropological fields and studies, parapsychology, thanatology, comparative religions, and mythology have contributed to the concept of spiritual emergency, a term that suggests both a crisis and an opportunity of rising to a new level of awareness or spiritual emergence. So there are many categories of spiritual emergency. I'm briefly going to go over some of the examples. The first one's very common, and you don't have to take psychedelics to have a spiritual emergency. Many people have them. Just going through hard knocks in life, lack of sleep, yoga, meditation, fasting, bad breakup, loss, grief. And super common, people go through reevaluation. One may ask, who am I? What is my purpose now? They may reevaluate their identity and their position perhaps in church or their culture at work, a spiritual group, perhaps experiencing disillusionment after a sexual assault within the establishment of the church or in their culture and community. Another very common spiritual emergency is dark night of the soul sickness, a period of spiritual desolation suffered by a mystic in which all sense of consolation is removed. You feel so alone. Evolutionary crisis, outgrowing old modes of thinking, perhaps after taking psychedelics. And, that can be a great, wonderful thing, but it can be confusing and turn into an emergency. Perhaps maybe you have a disability that's new, or you're a new mother and going through postpartum depression. That's a form of spiritual emergency. A psychic opening, seeing the future, hearing others' thoughts, including channeling and spirit guides. All wonderful things, but confusing if this is a brand new thing, and you may feel isolated from your community, as I did. Shamanic journey, traveling between the physical and spiritual worlds. Encounter with extraterrestrials. I bet you some of you are actually extraterrestrials. Mystical states like astral projection and out-of-body experiences. Emergence of a karmic pattern, which happens a lot of times during relationships, and also getting in touch with your body and doing yoga. They call it in yoga, I might pronounce this improperly, but I think it's samskaras is the emergence of the karmic pattern. And basically, they describe it, the yogis describe it as undigested ancestral experiences. Kind of sounds icky. Undigested ancestral experiences imprinted in our cellular DNA. And science is starting to show that too, so really rad. Which in turn form patterns of desires, reactions, and behaviors. They're not digested because we haven't released the emotional charge and story from our bodies. Kundalini awakening, really common in our community. The Kundalini experience is frequently reported to be a distinct feeling of electric current running along the spine. This snake-like coiled energy at the base of the spine can be activated by meditation. Possession states. Near-death experience. And then addiction. Addiction isn't necessarily a spiritual emergence or a spiritual, it's contributing to a spiritual emergency. I kind of think it's just an indication or a symptom of a spiritual emergency, self-medicating. In many ancient cultures, those immersed in a spiritual emergency are considered to be going through an initiation and have special gifts as a shaman or spiritual healer. I need some water. Give me one moment. They are taken under the wing of the village shaman, or the elder, the curandera, or spiritual teacher, for consistent social support and guidance. Through this training, the emergence process is integrated, and the initiate is prepared to serve the community with their special gifts. I bet you there's quite a few of you in here that have gone through that as well, so we're in good company. Shout out to my healers. Unfortunately, Western culture has been slow to incorporate these models of understanding, and our medical system is not properly educated or equipped to handle these spiritual processes to adequately facilitate healing. What we find in Western psychiatric treatment is a slew of stigmatizing pathologies and labels of mental disease, psychosis, and schizophrenia, leaving no acceptance for spiritual experience. This is most unfortunate in our culture. However, the transpersonal psychology and holistic healthcare models have adopted some helpful frameworks from indigenous cultures for spiritual emergencies. Treating spiritual processes as pathologies is an outdated and misinformed practice that needs to change because it is damaging people's lives in a deep and lasting way. Now let's look at the label of psychosis. Psychosis has been defined as any one of several altered states of consciousness, transient or persistent, that prevents integration of sensory or extrasensory information into reality models accepted by the broad consensus of society. And they lead to maladaptive behavior and social sanctions. Okay, that was really wordy and a tongue twister. We're going to go over that. We're going to break that down a little bit. So this is based on the assumption that we understand the nature of reality and that there is a narrow band of normal perception outside which there is little useful potential. I find that very curious because I think of reality models accepted by the broad consensus of Western society that lead to maladaptive behaviors and dysfunctional social sanctions. Like, let's look at our government. Corporations, consumer culture, and how we contribute to the devastation and destruction of our sacred plants and our planet and the resources. We pollute our water, we toxify our air while killing off plant and animal species. We are destroying our mother, our home, and ourselves. And then we have the colonization of indigenous cultures and sacred rights, the ban on cognitive liberty, and the criminalization of ritual use of healing plant medicines. In my opinion, these are maladaptive behaviors and dysfunctional social sanctions and controls. Yet they are tolerated, consented to, supported, and often straight out praised by the broad consensus of Western society. It seems to me that normal culture in our country fits the pathological description of psychosis. So we can certainly do better in the West, and maybe psychedelics are one of the medicinal catalysts that we need in order to emerge into higher states of being required to take big action. And with the psychedelic movements, we often see these spiritual emergence processes are direct catalysts for positive changes people make with regards to living more connected and sustainable lives. We have so much work to do to change the stigma associated with spirituality and psychedelics. As things currently stand, our mainstream medical model defines extrasensory information and perceptions that are not accepted by the broad consensus of society as psychotic and pathologizing these transcendental experiences. While we should be nurturing this sensitive and special process with care in a supportive environment, a safe container is necessary for the best outcome in positive transformation. If we continue to diagnose and treat a person based on the Western definition of psychosis, a person having a mystical experience on psychedelics will get slapped with the label of experiencing a psychotic episode that has little useful potential, as defined by psychosis. Little useful potential. I think a lot of us would disagree that spiritual states induced by psychedelics have little useful potential. I certainly do. We are finding these psychedelic substances to be immensely beneficial for healing ourselves and developing the compassion needed to work together to see the reality of the urgency needed to make the shift into more sustainable ways of living. The new psychedelic revolution is here, and sometimes it's spiritual. The concepts of spiritual emergence need to inform psychology, psychiatry, and therapy, not the other way around. We are changing, starting with psychiatric language. Words, labels, definitions, they mean something. They have huge power to shape perspectives and outcomes. When we change the word psychotic to spiritual maturation or evolution of consciousness, we start to view these normal spiritual emergence experiences as the rites of passage that they are. Recognizing this changes the paradigm and gives us a better framework to care compassionately for individuals going through a seemingly schizophrenic experience. It's important, it's crucial to understand that these non-ordinary states may in fact be bringing them to a more complete and functional self. In a publication written by Dr. Nikki Crowley called Psychosis or Spiritual Emergence, Consideration of the Transpersonal Perspective Within Psychiatry, Crowley states, the concept of spiritual emergency does not deny the seriousness of psychotic conditions, in which the psyche fragments and when sometimes violent and self-destructive aspects are manifested. There is no doubt that challenging, destructive, refractory mental states exist, the expression of which creates harm rather than healing for the person and society at large. Instead, the concept of spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency is intended to encourage discernment amongst mental health professionals in determining whether or not there are clues to possible personal growth from the non-ordinary experience being witnessed. Differentiating between a pathological psychotic illness or altered state of consciousness and one which resembles a mystical state, holding potential for healthy adaptation, growth, and healing, requires knowledge of the qualitative aspects of the spectrum of altered states of consciousness. So I couldn't agree more with that. I've been through many powerful spiritual emergence processes, and sometimes it was life's hard knocks alone, not always psychedelics. Being a solitary practitioner most of my life, I think I had a unique set of skills that guided me in the transformational process that I was undergoing for most of the time alone. I knew better than to reach out to a psychiatrist. My friends had varying degrees of reactions, all strained, but some had gone through their own, so they did the best to let me know I would figure it out eventually. Often feeling alone in this, I struggled immensely without proper support. Finding my footing and holding safe space for myself was supremely challenging and left me vulnerable to further traumatic experiences. How many of you out there going through a spiritual emergency ended up finding yourself in even more traumatizing situations afterwards? Yeah. Yeah, we need the proper care. We need peer support, and I'm glad to witness that, because I'm not alone and you're not alone. So we need more people trained, and to make the most of the healing potential, preparation and integration is supremely important. These are the keys in moving people forward through their healing journey, emerging on top of the mountain to meet their higher self. We cannot continue to suppress these experiences and lock people away in institutions or give them chemical lobotomies for seeing divinity. and the connection between us all. We are doing a great disservice to people when we use suppressive medications as the first course of action, which is usually what's happening when you're hospitalized. Just because people are perceiving reality differently. When we categorize their perceptions and delusions as hallucinations rather than spiritual experience and place them into an institution with other highly troubled individuals, this can be extremely harmful to the person in care, further damaging their psyche, causing fear, paranoia, and negativity. People in these altered states are highly sensitive to the environment and the energies of the people surrounding them. What they need is a safe container and to be able to fully express what's moving through their psyche from the depths of the unconscious and into the light of higher consciousness. They deserve to have open dialogue with caretakers without being pathologized and medicated. Their outcome depends on proper support. People going through these challenging experiences often just need to know that everything in this 3D world is okay, and they will be okay too. Having peer support is tantamount to recovering from any spiritual crisis. Open dialogue with understanding caretakers is crucial because it minimizes fear and the complications that go with fear. As it stands, the traditional Western medical model cuts off the emergence process, stunting or stopping the evolution of consciousness, growth, and healing. It's like cutting off a butterfly's wings. I want to stress that we should avoid using tranquilizers like Valium, Thorazine, Xanax, and any other suppressive medications when somebody is going through a spiritual emergency, whether psychedelically induced or not. I learned this by reading and also speaking a little bit to Stan Groff. He's very respected, and what he tells me I fully have faith in. He's done a lot of research. He's been around for a very long time. He used the quote, "The use of tranquilizers in the middle of a psychedelic session is a grave error and may be harmful. It tends to prevent the natural resolution of the difficult emotional or psychosomatic gestalt and to freeze the experience in a negative phase. The only constructive approach is to provide basic protection to the subject and support and facilitate the process. The least one can do is not interfere with it. Psychedelic sessions in which the emerging gestalt is not completed are conducive to prolonged reactions, negative emotional and physical after effects, and flashbacks." Which looks like post-traumatic stress and schizophrenia, so often caused by stopping the process, and then it just keeps going, and then we blame psychedelics for causing psychosis, when really they're just there to help us heal and get it out into the light. So here in the West, we often freeze this process of emergence with tranquilizers, and psychedelics, as defined by Groff, he calls them unspecific amplifiers that increase the energetic charge associated with the deep unconscious contents of the psyche and make them available for conscious processing. And that, my friends, is what we need to be using them for, in my humble opinion, in a safe container where trauma and spiritual emergency can run its course, followed by integration and holistic care. We can do better, and many other cultures are doing great with this. For example, has anyone heard of the spiritist centers in Brazil? Raise your hand if you've heard of them. Some people, not too many. I had not heard of them until I started studying this. So the admirable way Brazil cares for people by providing safe space and nurturance for the spiritual emergence process at their spiritist psychiatric centers These centers are transformative for their culture and serve as an excellent role model for us to study. With the Spiritist model, you have a fully holistic approach. So their healthcare is fully funded by the government, which is super helpful. And, they're free of charge for the citizens of Brazil. At these community-run centers, people going through an emergence process have a compassionate team of people to care for them, including doctors, spiritual guides, peer supporters, their family. The family is educated in this, and everyone facilitating care for the patient is equally respected in their role. My teacher said that peer supporters and spiritual healers get paid as much as the doctors. That's how important they are. Spiritists work as a holistic healthcare team because this dynamic is crucial for the success of the person in care to emerge into a higher state of being during a psychospiritual process. I like to point out the use of the word process rather than illness or disease or disorder. All of these labels are unnecessarily stigmatizing and do not properly define what is going on with a large number of people who are suffering. Now, there are actual diseases of the brain, such as cancer, and a doctor would assess the person in care to rule out any physical disease. The person in care at a Spiritist center would have access to nutritional therapy, energy healing, open dialogue with their peers, ecotherapy, or is it, no, sorry, it's ecotherapy, and gardening in an organic farm, bonding with horses and cows, and being out in a calm, natural setting. All things supportive of a healthy mind, body, and spirit connection. I kind of want to go there right now. What about you? Yeah, that sounds like fun. Cool. So after this, let's go. Brazil. This sounds amazing. Learning about this holistic way of caring really inspires me because the success helping people in the West would deem as psychotic emerge at higher levels of functioning than they did before they had a crisis. So what we might consider a normal person, then they go psychotic, and then they get the proper care because they weren't actually psychotic, and they function at vastly higher levels than before in their normal state. CEOs of companies where doctors would have told them, you have schizophrenia, it can't be healed, you can only medicate it. Here's a pill, go to a hospital, release in a week, go on the street because you can't function. Like, that's what happens here. And that needs to change. So that's the purpose of this talk. Very heavy for a beautiful sunny morning. So thank you for continuing to listen. So let's get a little personal. If anyone's brave enough to come up here and maybe talk about a supportive situation that you went through, or you know someone who went through, and why that was so beneficial for the spiritual emergence process. Anyone? Do you want to use the microphone, or do you want to talk loud?
I don't want to come up there. Please do. I'm actually so curious to hear how people think they might have found a solution to this, or if you want to comment to that. So about 4 years ago, I went to Temple of the Way of Light in Peru, which is like the ayahuasca place in Peru. Then I did their month-long ayahuasca retreat. So I did 8 ayahuasca sessions in a month, which...
It's a lot.
It is a lot, but it's also like they're doing this all the time. Lots of people come and do it. It's not considered a lot for them. Like some people do 8 within a week. great, very healing, and you're in this environment where there's no cell phone towers, there's no electricity, you're breathing the cleanest air, you're drinking the cleanest water, you're in the middle of the jungle, so you're getting cleansed just of environmental toxins too.
Nice.
I left, I went into the city of Iquitos, and I was like, oh my God, just like noise, and I was so just like overly stimulated and alert. I like immediately had to go back into the jungle, and I went there for another week, and I integrated. And then I had to fly home, and I live in central Portland, and the second I got home, I just felt like I could feel everything. Which is the point of plant medicine. It wants to connect us more to ourselves and others and plant beings so that we live harmoniously. That's
Definitely.
The point of it. But if you're an empath or you're sensitive, and now you're coming back to
the city.
it was, I could like feel my roommates breathing. Trump was running for presidency, so there was all of these
nightmare
protests happening downtown at the time. I could literally feel the protests happening downtown. I could feel the energy of the city. I could like hear the electricity coming from the power lines. I could like hear the Wi-Fi signals. It was like, and so I started having panic attacks all the time because my limbic system was just firing up as a response to the constant overstimulation. I all of a sudden stopped sleeping. I also felt like I could feel beings, like energies, like I was still kind of, and that was happening part of the ayahuasca ceremonies. I was tapping into other realms, like I was connecting with dead spirits. So when I came back, I could literally feel dead spirits. I felt like I was a medium for some of them. I just was completely boundaryless.
So I got a question. When you said you went back to the jungle to integrate, how long were you there integrating?
I had a week before I flew back, so it was really just like trying to find myself. So.
Did they help you integrate? Like, was there a practice around that?
An hour-long conversation of like, you're going to go back in and try and do self-care. And
self-care is not integration. It helps and it supports, but it's not integration.
I didn't really get that, and I was with a therapist at a time, and he's like, you're not okay. Like, you were fine before you left, you weren't okay. And I didn't know what to do after about a month of this. I finally admitted myself to the hospital because I was having chronic cancer. What to do. And before going on this trip, I actually was a very balanced person. So I guess looking back, that was a spiritual emergency full on.
Definitely. 100%.
No resources available, and a lot of people don't understand this and happen. It took about 3 months. My system became jaded again, and we're so intelligent it will.
Did they give you medications?
Yep, they put me on an antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication, which made me feel more crazy. So after a couple weeks of being on that, I came off.
Is it like buspirone or something?
It helped me with microdosing.
Yes, microdosing on what?
Psilocybin.
Yes, wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Might not work for everyone, but it worked for you, and that's great.
Yeah, and so I still, looking back, don't know what someone in this situation could do. I just eventually, resourced myself.
Good job.
But it was a pretty scary experience.
Definitely. How much more time do I have? Concludes my talk. Thank you.